Good morning, and welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a philosophically based spiritual community founded on existential philosophy and grounded in feminist principles and dedicated to human liberation and the protection of the natural world. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. We make our spiritual home in the old stone church, which was hand-built 100 years ago by the African-American Antioch East Baptist Church. We honor their labors of love and the powerful history of this special place. We acknowledge that our spiritual home stands on land forcibly taken from the Muskogee Creek people. We support justice and equality for all Indigenous people. This morning's opening words are a poem that I came across entitled Choices by Nikki Giovanni. And since much of existentialism is about how we consider our choices, I found this poem to be a nice way to start off our year 2022. Choices. If I can't do what I want to do, then my job is to not do what I don't want to do. It's not the same thing, but it's the best I can do. If I can't have what I want, then my job is to want what I've got and be satisfied that at least there is something more to want. Since I can't go where I need to go, then I must go where the signs point, though always understanding parallel movement isn't lateral. When I can't express what I really feel, I practice feeling what I can express, and none of it is equal, I know. But that's why mankind, alone among the animals, learns to cry. So thank you again to Nikki Giovanni for that poem entitled Choices. This morning we're going to have another new song to us it was recorded by Aviva, and it's called Hini Matav, which means it's good to gather together. So, take it away, Aviva.
Hini Matov, the Hebrew song that means how good it is to gather together. Hine Matov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Matov u'manayim sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Matov sheverachim gam yachad. Hine Matov sheverachim gam yachad. טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, 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 שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Thank you so much, Aviva. Another lovely song, and always wonderful to hear you and see you. Today's speaker, after publishing a dozen books, serving a series of progressive parishes, and 10 years writing a blog called Progressive Christian Reflections, Reverend Chris Glaser retired earlier this year to embrace a kind of spiritual silence. This will be his first presentation since his retirement. He is grateful for the opportunity. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Chris Glaser.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you this morning, and thank you for providing this opportunity to pre-record my talk to you. I want to thank Robert and Patton for helping me with this process, and my husband Wade, who has helped me with the technical aspects of this, and hopefully everything will go okay. It's a pleasure to be with you, even remotely, and I look forward to when we can all be together again. And I will be participating in the Zoom service that follows as well. So if you have any things you want to say or a question or discuss with me, I will be available for that. Thank you all again for inviting me. Anybody out there fear for your mental health during this pandemic? I found myself wondering if it's possible to have the symptoms of long COVID, you know, the brain fog, the emotional doldrums, and fatigue, when one hasn't yet had COVID-19. Since I was last with you, we have experienced what's been termed an existential threat to our democracy, endured the existential threat of the pandemic, and have so far survived the existential threat of climate change. With all these existential threats, this is a good time to be an existentialist, living in the moment. Especially relevant for today's YouTube Zoom service of First Existentialists of Atlanta. Also, since I was last with you, Wade and I have personally experienced the perils of the severe weather attributed to climate change. During one storm, a very tall tree of a neighbor, who happens to be our pastor, fell across another neighbor's backyard, knocked down part of our new fence, and took out our full and tall and beloved Bradford pear tree in the center of our backyard. After the same storm, a few days later, a very old and very tall and revered tree in our neighbor's front yard fell across our street, taking out our dogwood and our crepe myrtle in our yard. knocking down our mailbox, which was on the street, and our water fountain in the center of our yard, and severely damaging both cars of our next door neighbors. We not only got the upper portions of the huge trunks of the fallen trees in our yards, but all their branches as well. A mess of biblical proportions, at least to us. Our neighbors counted us blessed because the trees narrowly missed our house and deck. It took weeks to cut up and clean up the trunks and branches and have them removed with the help of friends and neighbors and a professional crew. But of course, this experience paled in comparison to what we were seeing on the news about the pandemic and hearing from friends who lost spouses, significant others, family members, friends, and colleagues. The worldwide pandemic is truly a disaster of biblical proportions. Though I tried to make sense of it in the final months of my blog, my words, no words, can capture, let alone control or even heal what we have been through. After 10 years of writing my weekly blog, I had planned to retire months earlier, but I stayed on, not so much as a solution to our several existential crises, but because I didn't want to abandon my readers, much as your congregation has stuck with it during this pandemic and stuck with all of us, as is often said, during these difficult times. This is the essence of spiritual friendship and spiritual community. With all of you, no doubt, I prayed for and supported all the more fervently leaders and voters, volunteers, and first responders that showed compassion and wisdom, the know-how and skills required to get us through. And of course, these disasters were paralleled by our political turmoil regarding our presidential election, and there are those who resisted its results, which included an attack on our nation's capital, whose anniversary we observed this past week. All of these existential crises are enough to make anybody crazy, to throw any one of us off balance. I've been reading the Franciscan priest Richard Rohr's book entitled Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. Comparing the spiritualities and mythologies of the world religions, he writes, sooner or later, if you are on any kind of classical spiritual schedule, some event, person, death, idea, or relationship will enter your life that you simply cannot deal with using your present skill set, your acquired knowledge, or your strong willpower. Spiritually speaking, you must be led to the edge of your own private resources, Rohr writes. This is the only way that life, fate, God, grace, mystery, however you want to name it, can get you to change. Let go of your egocentric preoccupations and let go on the further end and go on the further end of your larger journey. Rohr concludes, I wish I could say the way this was not true, but it is darn near absolute in the spiritual literature of the world. We must actually be out of the driver's seat for a while, or we will never learn how to give up control to the real guide. We must actually be out of the driver's seat for a while, Richard Rohr writes, or we will never learn how to give up control to the real guide. Who, you might ask, is the real guide? As you may recall, I was reared as a fundamentalist Christian, one who thought I knew the answers. A certainty thrown out the window when I realized that I was gay. I was no longer in control of my own feelings, let alone my future, in which I had hoped to serve as a Presbyterian minister. A different path was laid out for me, and I became instead a Presbyterian activist, working to change the broader church's trajectory of condemning and excluding gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. My writing skills, instead of being applied to writing a great American novel, as I'd hoped, or even writing a timeless spiritual classic that would reach everyone regardless of religious tradition or lack of religious background, my writing skills would be applied instead to helping people of faith understand and welcome queer and other marginalized people's perspectives, insights, relationships, and soulfulness. My writings also helped LGBTQ people reclaim our own faith and engage with people of faith. So my existential crisis became my existential calling. My existential crisis became my existential calling. How can I be gay and Christian became how can I be sexual and spiritual, which became how can we together celebrate our sexuality and spirituality? It's like the begats in biblical genealogies. I believe that our existential crises occasioned by politics and the pandemic and climate change give us opportunities for transformation as individuals, as communities, as congregations, as countries in an interconnected world. Writers have suggested we're not simply dealing with the immediate years of the pandemic, but we might think of COVID-19 as an era, something that will linger in our consciousness and our memories, perhaps for the rest of our lives. That's happened for the LGBTQ community in relation to HIV/AIDS. I wrote a post on my blog entitled, "This is not my first pandemic," connecting the AIDS pandemic to our COVID-19 pandemic. By the way, all my posts are still available free on my blog, and you can find them by calling them up by topic. During the pandemic, I watched again one of my favorite films, Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, about a small coastal village in California besieged by attacking birds. This time watching it, as I saw the actress Tippi Hedren pinned in a telephone booth, remember those? By unusually aggressive birds, I better felt her dilemma as I have felt pinned down and pinned in by one news story after another about our political divisions, our pandemic, and the disastrous weather of climate change. I think my first blog about the pandemic itself came as I was binge watching the original Twilight Zone, a television series I loved as a kid. The very first episode, "Where is Everybody?" became the title of the post. It's about a man who finds himself alone in a small town which seems to have been abandoned by its citizens. That's the way many of us felt as we socially distanced from strangers and neighbors and the people we love. I rewatched the episode this week in hopes of finding something new for this talk. One scene paralleled Tippi Hedren's scene in the telephone booth in The Birds. the lonely man somehow gets trapped in a telephone booth and tries to push his way out. Then he remembers that the doors of a telephone booth open inward and is able to make his escape. My aha in that moment was that to escape being stuck in the telephone booth, he had to go inward, pull open the doors into his own space to find his way out. Whether confined in a space roughly the size of a closet, by frightening news stories, or by social distancing, we too need to go inward. That's where we will find the real guide. Again, Rohr writes, we must actually be out of the driver's seat for a while, or we will never learn how to give up control to the real guide. Losing control may help us gain wisdom and insight about our own transformation and our own unique callings in these difficult times.
Thank you so much, Reverend Glaser, again for coming and sharing your words with us today. Please join us on Zoom immediately following today's broadcast for our meet and greet, where we will discuss some of the ideas and topics that Reverend Glaser introduced to us today, as well as sharing personal joys, sorrows, and concerns, and community announcements with one another. You can find the link to the Zoom meeting in the chat section of today's broadcast. Next week, we will be welcoming back Reverend Angela Denise Davis with her talk, Little David's Harp, The Transformative Power of Music. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. We hope to either see you on Zoom immediately following this or next week at 11 a.m. Until then, have a great rest of your day today, great rest of your weekend, and a great week ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.